So, just from reading this book, if you haven't read Descartes before, you're already a lot smarter about the history of philosophy because you know the origin of that tagline, that what's become a cliche, the "I think, therefore I am." And it's nice that popular culture has some awareness of classical lines in the history of philosophy. It's just that they get thrown around without anybody having any idea like what they mean or why anybody would have thought of them. Well, now we know. It's great. But the problem with knowing the origin of something, it's like knowing how the sausage is made. I mean, you know that there are problems, there are difficulties, there are perplexities, and I think that we have some notion of that. I think, therefore, I am. Well, okay. What it basically means is I cannot doubt the fact that I'm thinking, and I cannot doubt the fact that I exist. Where does that get me? Well, immediately Descartes claims it gets that knowledge, that the first principle of the philosophy he was seeking. He says that leads him to another truth, and that has to do with himself. What sort of creature, what sort of being, I should say, he is. He continues there at the bottom of page 18. Then, examining with attention what I was, and seeing that I could pretend that I had no body, and that there was no world, nor any place where I was, I could not pretend, on that account, that I did not exist at all, and that, on the contrary, from the very fact that I thought of doubting the truth of other things, it followed very evidently and very certainly that I existed. Whereas, on the other hand, had I simply stopped thinking, even if all the rest of what I had ever imagined had been true, I would have had no reason to believe that I had existed. That is, he is able to assert his own existence on the basis of his thinking. So without his thinking, he would not have been able to assert the basis of his existence. So what does that say? From this, I knew that I was a substance, Aristotelian language, a being, a real thing, not necessarily a physical substance, right? Substance just means entity, existing being. That I was a substance, the whole essence or nature of which is simply to think. So if I didn't think, I would have no basis for saying that I existed. I can imagine not having a body and still existing. I can imagine not being in the world, the physical world of nature, and still existing. But I can't imagine not thinking and still existing. Therefore, thinking is my essence. Therefore, thinking is my essence in the sense that it's the attribute that essentially makes me what I am, so that if I didn't have that attribute, I would be either nothing or a very different thing. From this I knew that I was a substance, the whole essence or nature of which is simply to think, and which, in order to exist, has no need of any place, nor depends on any material thing. Thus, this I, that is to say, the soul, he's calling it the soul, through which I am what I am, is entirely distinct from the body, and is even easier to know than the body. And even if there were no body at all, it would not cease to be all that it is. That's the thinking thing. The res cogitans in Latin, you might hear that, which is another big principle that he has here. So what has, in metaphysical terms, that is in terms of his deepest knowledge of reality, what has the method of only accepting that which is absolutely clear and distinct, and only reasoning very carefully on the basis of those clear and distinct principles to find more complex truths? Those two, or either of those two maxims being applied here, what have they led him to know? What can he know with certainty? That he exists, and that moreover, he is a thinking thing. Essentially, he is thought. He is mind. So that if he stopped thinking, he would stop existing. He is not. He may be other things too. He may have body. He may be part of nature too. But that wouldn't be an essential aspect of him, and the basis for that is saying that he can imagine his own existence without those things, whereas he can imagine his own existence without thinking. It's absolutely essential. So it's a more essential, more primary attribute of him than any other, that he thinks. So remember, he said that he wants to start with the simple, the easy, the indubitable, and then work his way up to the more complex, the more obscure, the harder truth. Uh, so what does he get out of this besides this bare knowledge that he exists and that supposedly he is essentially mind or thinking substance? Continues on page 19 in the second paragraph. After this, I considered in general what is needed for a proposition to be true and certain. For since I just found one of them that I knew to be such, I thought I ought also to know in what this certitude consists. That is, he's sure of these two things. And then he asks himself, well, not so much why am I sure, he's sure because he can't doubt these things. But what is it like to be sure? That is, I have the experience now of being certain of these two propositions. I think, therefore I am. And I am a thinking thing. What are the experiences? How does it feel to be certain? I mean, that is, you see how he wants to generalize. If I can feel that way about other things I know, or feel is the wrong word, if I can experience the same, if I can have the same experience cognitively about other things that I seem to know, then I probably know them too. And having noticed that there is nothing at all in this I think, therefore I am, that assures me that I am speaking the truth, except that I see very clearly that in order to think it is necessary to exist, I judge that I could take as a general rule, that the things we conceive very clearly and very distinctly are all true. But that there is merely some difficulty in properly discerning which are those that we distinctly conceive. It's a big but. It's a big if, right? It's a big qualification. But it's very important to see what he's claimed here, is that he's found something, two things actually, at least two things, that he's absolutely certain of. And based upon the experience of being certain, he's asking himself, what is it about the thinking of those ideas that makes them so certain, and makes them indubitable to me? And he says, it's that they are very clear and very distinct. So I guess what he's saying is that I can generalize from that. And if I think anything else very clearly and very distinctly, it must be true too. Which is a kind of criterion of truth, which is kind of what Sextus Empiricus was looking for. The clarity and distinctness criterion is a criterion of truth. He instantly qualifies it, though, but that there is merely some difficulty in properly discerning which are those that we distinctly conceive. Because, of course, to say that everything that I conceive of clearly and distinctly is true, that may be okay, but what do clarity and distinction mean? Are they relative terms? Are they absolute terms? Are things, are things clear and distinct only relative to other things which are less clear and distinct? And how clear and distinct does something have to be in order for it to be true? Certainly the doubtability criterion is somewhat different. Does something have to be as undoubtable as the I think, therefore I am in order to be fully clear and distinct? Those kind of questions are still open questions. What's rather surprising, I think, at this point in part 4 is where the thing goes, what direction it goes in, because, of course, it goes in a theological direction. And there are various reasons for that, one would imagine, both historical reasons. Descartes on very shaky ground. This is a time of scientists being persecuted by the authorities for their heterodox religious beliefs. There are personal reasons. Descartes apparently was a very devout Christian and wants to talk about God, prove certain things about God. And there are reasons internal to his own philosophy for why it's to his advantage to establish that God exists, because that can perhaps lead him and justify him in claiming to know other things, especially about physical objects, material objects in nature. So we'll look at that part of part 4 in the next lecture.